be an American where at least I know I'm free. But I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me, and I gladly stay.
This is Wild About Liberty, where the community joins together. Now here's your host, Terry Wild.
Thank you for tuning into our program today. We're moving closer and closer to Christmas. It's an exciting time of the year. I've got on the program with me someone that I think has keen insight and knowledge about a lot of the political issues that we're dealing with. But more than that, he has a deep understanding and walk with Jesus Christ. And so, Lawrence Hebron, thanks for coming on the program.
Oh, happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
So it's going to be you and me. And I had another guest, but I thought, I just want to talk with Lawrence and kick some stuff around and help people to see some of the things that are going on from the right perspective, which is our obligation here at Wild About Liberty is we're here to represent Jesus Christ and his values and his authority and his lordship over his creation. So that means that we're standing on his property. This is planet Earth belongs to him. He made it. He owns it. And in a way, we could be called trespassers. So we'll talk about some of that. But Lawrence, you've written a couple books, and why don't you give our listeners a little bit of your background?
Well, depending on how far back we go, I did serve in the United States Marine Corps. So that added a lot to my perspective on life. I think the people who have that kind of background oftentimes appreciate life a lot more. I've seen some of the people with the gentlest, kindest, and most giving hearts are those who've experienced life in the military and oftentimes combat, and they know how ugly it can get to be without all of the values that Jesus Christ taught about. So that's been one thing. I've my educational background, have degrees in history, political science, and business administration. More recently, though, you've talked about the books. I've written a few books, mostly nonfiction. We have one, the first one that came out was about 13 years ago, was called Solutions, Guidebook for Rebuilding America the Great. And if that subtitle sounds like a familiar political campaign, I had it. I used it a few years before somebody else adopted it. So we have that, and then I wrote AR2, Handbook for the Second American Revolution. And then I have another one on Islam Exposed, what you need to know about the world's most dangerous religion. And then I have a couple of fictional pieces. One is called In the Beginning. It's a conversation between God and the baby in the womb. So it starts right after conception, actually with conception, and then God shows up and there's a 9-month conversation. I tried to imagine God, of course, would be there. The Bible tells us he's there as we were knit together in our mother's womb. Don't you think that he would want to give his new child a divine, benign heads up about what to expect? So that goes on. And then at the end of it, the first section is 7 chapters on God's conversation with the baby in the womb. It ends just a few hours after birth. And then section 2 has just 1 chapter. It jumps ahead about 82 years. And now this same person is in an ambulance heading back to the hospital where he's going to die. And there'll be another conversation between him and God. And his life has been tough. There have been a lot of reasons to question his faith and even to question what God had told him before. And so there's a need for a reconciliation there. And then my most recent one is also a work of fiction. It's built on the base laid in AR2, the Handbook for the Second American Revolution. This one's called AR2 Squared.
And you're really talking about nonviolent, right?
Yes. Revolutions. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out because a lot of people hear the word revolution and they start having little bladder control issues. They get pretty nervous. Revolutions do not have to be violent, and we certainly hope that they won't be And the more we anticipate the need for changing things in the country, and the sooner we start to respond to that need, the less likelihood there'll be for violence.
Well, explain
that.
You
do have to be prepared
give us a little.
for it.
Give us a little description or example of why it wouldn't be violent.
Well, we have things that are called revolutions, like the Industrial Revolution, the Communication Revolution, the Technical Revolution. A revolution is usually thought of as something that brings about a fundamental and substantial change from the way things were done in the past. Actually, there's a problem with that. The root word for revolution is revolve. So a true revolution goes back to something that existed before.
Very interesting.
So when I talk about AR2, American Revolution number 2, I'm definitely talking about getting back to many of the principles, practices, and documents that guided us in the first place. I mean, we were really quite unique in human history, what we did in the United States. And those are precisely the things that led us to become history's wealthiest, most powerful, and noblest nation.
Well,
I'm not at all.
Let me just ask you a question about that, because you're really talking about some, issues that you're talking about what's going on right now. You're talking about returning back to values that are tried and proven, and yet we have this woke left, I would call it Marxist communist agenda, because they're using the Marxist playbook. If you go through that manifesto, you can see every aspect of how they're trying to apply that and control us and take away our liberties and our rights. So you're saying we want to go back, and that's really the point we need to make with people. Back to something that has proven to be successful, but the opposition is making us look like we're passé, we're obsolete, the past should be ignored, and they want to tear it down, but there's no idea of what they want to replace it with. So touch on that a little bit.
Well, it's one thing that's interesting, and this will get to that whole issue of going back to things. You started to talk about the woke, the left. It's hard to find a name to tag them with. One of the ones that's often used by themselves is the progressive movement. When you know your history, you realize that there's nothing progressive about this. It's actually regressive.
In what way? How is it regressive?
If you look back on history, almost every nation that has ever existed has been a feudal kleptocracy. So let me explain that. A kleptocracy is a real word. I didn't make it up. Maybe a lot of people are familiar with the term kleptomaniac. It's from a Greek word. It refers to stealing. So a kleptocracy is a government that's organized to steal. And almost every government that has ever existed has been a kleptocracy. If you look at it, I mean, we have all these different words. And I remember when I was in school, we had to memorize the definitions for all these different types of government. There's democracy, there's republic, there's a theocracy, there's et cetera and so forth. It just goes on and on. Well, after I got out from under the guidance of the official educators and continued my education, it dawned on me that no, there haven't been all of these different types of government. There's been basically government organized by a power elite to steal the wealth that was created by we the people. Wealth is not money. Money is a way of measuring and exchanging wealth conveniently. Wealth is goods and services. And who creates goods and services? We do. You're doing one right now. You're creating a service to all of your listeners. All of your listeners do something. They create goods, they create services. That's wealth. And the power elite has always wanted to take that wealth from them. And to do that, they've organized a structure of government that is feudal in nature. Now, a lot of people think, oh, that's ridiculous. Feudalism ended hundreds of years ago. Not really. A feudal model is where you have a power elite that seeks to extract wealth and power from the society where they rule. But there's not enough of them to be able to accomplish their objectives. So they have to recruit other people to support them. These are their vassals. Now, they give the vassals a vested interest in supporting them. In the past, in the ancient days, what we think of as classic feudalism, they'd give them land grants, pieces of land that they could use to
Right.
their wealth and all. We'd give them military titles. We'd give them police powers and items like that. Now we give them a pension, we give them a payroll, we give them perks to buy their loyalty. Now, between these two groups, the power elite and the vassals, there are now enough people to be able to manage and suppress the rest of the population. And virtually every government has always done that. And they have there's certain symptoms that you can look for.
So let me just ask you this. I'm trying to absorb that in context of what's actually going on today in America. And so what is going on in America is there is a transference of power. Power is being taken away from the people, and it's being put into the hands of a select few. So I could easily relate that to Gavin Newsom, the supermajority in Sacramento, and this transference of power now rests in just the hands of a few people. And so that's what you're talking about. We went from freedom, individual freedom and expression, to now we're being controlled what our options are to go to church, if we're considered a necessary or unnecessary. Who's making those decisions? So that's the way I'm looking at it. See if you can make that connection.
Yes, well, the connection is through the United States. See, virtually every country has been a feudal kleptocracy until the United States came along. And the founders and framers of the United States didn't want that. And they created something radically different. So when you talk about American exceptionalism, it truly is one of the most exceptional in that it is an exception to the rule, one of the most exceptional nations ever. And they basically took all of the basic tenets of the feudal kleptocrats and turned them on their head. Instead of concentrating power, which makes it easy for the power elite, we broke it up and spread it around. Instead of confiscating wealth, we let people keep their wealth. We had almost no taxation in the beginning of our history. Instead of controlling education and limiting it, we wanted everybody to be educated. And the list just goes on. And in almost every example of how the feudal kleptocrats ruled and the methods that they used, you found the United States did the exact opposite. And the results were phenomenal. We became the richest, most powerful, noblest nation ever. Well, this became a target for the power elite. They wanted all that power and they wanted all that wealth for themselves. So they had to start to destroy the underpinnings of that power.
Like what? Give me an example.
The examples would be our biblical values, where we treat people with respect. We honor their freedom to live their lives the way they want to, as long as they're not hurting someone else. And then, of course, the same values that have been enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States.
And the Bill of Rights.
Bill of Rights being a part of it. Yes, that's the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. So what happened was the founders and framers very successfully built a wall that kept the power elite from coming in and abusing the masses and confiscating their wealth. But it was still tempting to them. So what they had to do is they had to destroy the wall. So what have we seen happen over the last 60, 70 years? We've seen the destruction of our spiritual value. We've seen the destruction of our constitutional principles. We've seen them being revised. We notice when we hear the expression living document, a living document is a term that sounds really nice, but is really a con. The idea of a living document, the idea here is that, well, certain documents are over time. Well, the real purpose here is something's in my way. I want to redefine it so that I don't have to be restricted by it. Now think about the two places where we hear this term living document. Constitution and the Bible. And so the idea here is the power elite are trying to destroy those supports wall that keeps them from coming in and seizing the power and seizing the wealth that has been created by the United States.
So in our case,
that's where we get to the things that you were talking about.
But what you're saying makes so much sense, and what I want to understand myself, and what I want our listeners to understand is, we are on solid ground. Our Constitution, no one's been able to surpass it. No one's able to come up with another document better that gives people the most freedom, the most opportunity, and really be governed by the will of the people. And now what you're saying is that there's been this pattern throughout all of history. Here's a connection I want to make. I forget the quote, but it said that this republic is ours if we can keep it. And it was made for people of moral values. And if you don't have that belief in God, it will erode. Well, it has eroded. But see if you can tell me if you can make that connection to what you're saying, to the fact that people have turned away from God and now we really are in trouble.
Well, the quote that you mentioned, you actually kind of brought together two really important ones. One was the day that the Constitution was ratified, or not ratified, but the day that the work of the Constitutional Convention ended. Benjamin Franklin was walking along with someone else who had been involved in the convention, and a woman came up to him and says, "Dr. Franklin, what have you given us, a monarchy or a republic?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it."
Yes.
The task. And then John Adams, who is not only one of the major political figures, but also a strong, devout Christian, said that our government was made only, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other.
So that really is the key point, really, to me. If we're asking, the exact connection that I'm thinking about and trying to make is, we're living under this this assault from a group of people who really are implementing or trying to implement Marxism and communism. Now, I lived in Moscow for a year. I saw firsthand there was never communism in Russia. People say there was, and they think there was. Now, in China, yes, that it's more of a communist system. But it was a joke, because all we had was a dictator named Joseph Stalin, and that's what kind of a government ruled Russia until he died. And then afterward, everybody tried to, have as much power as they could get their hands on. But they're trying to implement Marxist beliefs, saying that our way of government, our Constitution is passé, it's obsolete, we need to change it. But what they're changing it to is this government control over every aspect of our life, the nanny state. We have to ask permission. We don't have freedom of speech. We don't even have freedom of assembly. We don't even have freedom of religion, because with the COVID thing, they just came in and said, "No, we're in charge. We're going to tell you what to do." So that exact point at which it was said that Adam said this was wholly made for a religious people, the further you depart from that, that's when it all comes apart in my mind. So talk about that.
Exactly. Here's the crux of the whole thing. Your program is called Wild About Liberty. And the United States is known for having given liberty, far more liberty than has ever been given in the past to a large group of people, and to sustain that. But there is an inextricable connection between liberty and morality. See, as much as we value liberty, the fact of the matter is you cannot give liberty to an immoral people because it won't work. If you give a great deal of liberty to an immoral people, they'll do immoral stuff. And what is immorality? By definition, it's hurting other people. So if you give people the freedom and they're immoral, they'll use that freedom to hurt other people. And when that happens, then you start to see the decline and the decay of the society, and that gives the power elite the excuse to move in and to reestablish safety. And that's one of the greatest things that has been a threat to liberty throughout the ages. People are afraid. And so the government comes in and says, I'll take care of that for you. You just give me a little more of your money and some of your freedom, and I'll make sure you're safe. Well, in the United States, they're creating an unsafe environment, and they're undermining the religious principles of the Bible that preach the morality that help hold us all together. And so we can live in freedom because we're not going to go out there and just see an old lady on the street and hit her over the head and steal her purse just because you want to.
But you know, that's a good point. Last night on the news, it showed 6 or 7 people walking into not a big box store, but it was a medium department store, and they were taking all these items, loading them up, taking them out to their cars. They showed their cars. They actually showed some of their faces, but they didn't care. They were taking all this merchandise and stealing it, and nobody was doing anything about it. Nobody could do anything about it. You know, there's a threat of serious harm if you get involved. And so they're actually just walking in, 6, 8 people. Everyone's kind of standing in aghast what's going on, and they're just walking out the door with the goods. And that's an example of what you're saying. If we let immoral people have that level of freedom, then we're going to get this kind of a lifestyle, this kind of a system. So how do we now, we're in this problem, how do we solve it?
Well, let me first go back and kind of restate what you just talked about here. Let's look at the sequence of events. The Bible says, you shall not steal.
Right.
Our founders and framers set up a constitution that enforced that. You shall not steal. And then we teach the Bible lessons so that children growing up know, no, you don't steal. If you don't have that inner policeman, that inner gendarme saying, don't do that, then you're going to need the external policeman standing on every street corner. So you start off, the Bible says, don't steal. We weave that into the fabric of our society by supporting the Constitution and biblical values, which we always used to teach. But now we've been breaking away from that. So what is the result? What you just described. We have these hooligans breaking in and stealing all this property. What happens then? So here's where you have to get to the solution. Let's see what happens next. Now people don't feel secure. People don't feel secure in their businesses. They don't feel secure in their homes. They don't feel secure in their persons walking down the street. So they know that they have to do something about that. Unless they're content to be a victim, then they're going to have to do something to protect themselves. If the government doesn't protect them, then they're going to have to protect themselves. And this can lead to open the door to a whole range of really dangerous operations, vigilante type groups and things like that. So how do we solve that? Hopefully you try to prevent it. The way you prevent it is by teaching and preaching those biblical and constitutional values that made us great in the first place. But now it's too late for that. I would mark 1947 in a Supreme Court case called Everson versus the Board of Education as the turning point. From that point on, we've removed God from government. We've exiled him from government. We've expelled him from our schools. We've minimized and marginalized him in all aspects of our society. And we have just seen a decline in our society, in our morality, and in the quality of life in America as a result. So what we have to do now is we have to be very unashamed and unabashed about going back and saying, you know what, our founders had it right. Instead of toppling statues, we need to be building more statues to honor what they did and who they were.
That's right.
The Bible and the Constitution. This is what we need to get back to. And if we don't, it's going to get really ugly. Because, again, those people, the power elite, have been trying to create a very unstable situation in the United States because they will benefit from that lack of stability. They want to see the United States crumble at least enough to give them an excuse to swoop in and use the power of the state to tell people, well, we'll keep you secure. You just have to do it our way. Do what we tell you, and don't argue with us, and it'll all work out.
Well, look at the contrast. So on the side of the woke left, I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. You're right. What label do you put on this? But the woke left in California, and we're about the worst example. It's going on everywhere. It's in Chicago. It's in New York. I mean, but California overall is the worst example of defying the principles of morality and good government. They're giving people the right in San Francisco to occupy the streets, to live in drugs and in filth and in alcoholism, and I mean, it's just there's no description for it. So we've got a really good example of what's bad, and they have failed to uphold law and order. Well, that is an agenda. This isn't just happening spontaneously. There's a plan. There's an agenda. And so their message is, look, do whatever you want, whatever feels good to you. You can have the abortion anytime you want. Just kill life because it's inconvenient. I mean, how much more can you define immorality? That is immorality at its worst. So our message is turn to God. Our message is uphold law and order. And we're made to be looked at like the fools. We're considered phobes and racists and all these titles that they're putting on us. So most of the people I know trying to combat this agenda of the woke left, they're all saying the same thing. We have to turn to God. So now let's just talk a little bit. I'm writing a book called The Rights of God, and it's changed my life. I'm still writing. I've been writing it for 4 years. I put it away because I kind of run out of what I think, needs to be said. But let's look at God's point of view. So here's a God that created everything. This is his property. We're occupiers. Now, how is he looking at us? How is he viewing all this that's going on? What are his thoughts, his feelings, his attitude? He has joy. He has sadness. He gets grieved. He finds satisfaction and pleasure in us. And so that is the dimension that needs to be clarified, I think. People need to understand that there's a God that's not only big and powerful, he has feelings. Mm-hmm. And those feelings are affected by what we do. And so that message of turning back to God, it becomes necessary to define who God is. And so for us, Jesus Christ is the fullness of the Godhead bodily. He's our representative man who is God. So how do you see that message being successfully put out there, not just to save America, but to save our souls?
Well, there's going to have to be some motivation. We see this throughout the Bible. I mean, the book of Judges covers this very well. We have something called the cycle of Judges. And in the cycle of Judges, from the time of Joshua and leading the people into the promised land, we see this cycle repeat itself. God's there and he says, look, I love you guys and I want you to have a great life. So here, do it this way and everything will go great. But if you don't do it this way, things are going to fall apart. So for a while, the Israelites would follow that model. But then they think they'd find something better. I don't want to follow the old man's rules, just like some kid. I think I know better. And so they go off and they don't follow God's rules and his regulations. So what happens? Everything starts to fall apart. And then the people suffer enough, and then they turn back to God. They say, God, please help us, forgive us. We went astray and everything's fallen apart. Please help us. And then God would come in, usually establish a new ruler, not really a king, but kind of a mix of king and priest and moral leader called a judge. And the judge would do what God said and everything would get good again. And then, boy, the whole nation would prosper. But then the whole process would start again. This kept going over and over and over. And they call it the cycle of judges. Well, this is not unique to Israel. It's part of human existence. And I'm like to think that things are finally starting to get bad enough. I hate to think that things have to get bad, but looking at human history, they do. I'd like to think that things are getting bad enough that people finally are getting off the sofa. We're getting rid of these political and spiritual couch potatoes. They're finally feeling a motivation to get up and do something. And hopefully that's where our job comes in. We need to guide them in that. We say, yeah, you're tired of walking down the streets and having to step over all these drug addicts that are crashed on the sidewalk and all the body fluids and excretions that have happened. They're all over the place, stinking up the place, and all the theft and insecurity. You're tired of that. How do we get back to a better way, the way that we had? And here again is where the revolution comes in. We have to revolve and go back to what we were doing because there's another option being offered out there.
So what are some of the steps to doing that?
Well, we have to realize, first of all, that the other option being given to us by the wokesters, the regressives, the left, is more government. Well, that is not the answer.
And it wasn't the answer. That's what we ran away from and started America over.
Exactly. I mean, and I've talked to groups and I've asked this question many times. Name me 5 things that the government does well. Now, by well, I mean effectively and efficiently. Effectively means it gets the job done, and efficiently means it gets the job done with a minimum of waste and expense. Okay, name me 5 things. And I see these blank looks. I see eyes rolling up to the ceiling. I've only ever had 2 answers. All the times I've asked this, I don't know how many people have heard this. The one answer I usually get is, well, our military. I'll say, okay, yeah, our military, at least up until recently, was the best on earth. However, I don't think we can give the Department of Defense any awards for efficiency. I mean, they're the guys who give us the $400 toilet seats, the $600 hammers, and things like that. So then they go back and think, the only other answer I ever had was the cross-country railroad. And I said, I'm not real expert on that, but I do seem to remember that there were some cases of graft and corruption in that. But even if I give that to you, could you name me something that happened in the last century? And the guy's eyes rolled upward. He couldn't come up with anything. Well, if we can't come up with 5 things, 3 things, 1 thing that the government does well, then why do we want to entrust it with more and more aspects of our lives? And the other side of this is we have to understand what government does and how it does it. Government exists to take away liberties. I mean, that's not the expressed purpose of it, but think about how it works. Government works through making, enforcing, and adjudicating laws. Almost all laws work to limit our freedoms. You don't need to make people do something that they're ordinarily going to do. There's no law to regulate breathing. And you also don't need laws to prohibit people from doing something that they would never do. There's no laws that prohibit you from taking a bath in sulfuric acid because nobody's going to do it. So we only need laws to keep you from doing something that you would otherwise do, or to make you do something that you wouldn't otherwise do. So by their very nature, laws tend to restrict liberties. The bigger the government, the fewer the liberties. And so if you want small government, if you want more liberty, you need small government. But again, like we mentioned before, you can't have liberty. You can't give liberty to an immoral people
So-
because they'll do immoral stuff.
But
So-
if you get practical on that, it takes you right back to law and order. So step number one is law and order. You have to have protection, and you have to have recourse when something happens to you. You have to know that there's justice available, and so that sounds like a political slogan to me. We're in 2024. We've got all this drama going on with Donald Trump. I'm sure he's going to be the Republican candidate myself. That's my opinion. And so he's going to be running against probably Gavin Newsom. I don't think Joe Biden has the snowball's chance of actually running. And so now, as a campaign, if you want to win the votes, you've got people now that are so concerned about law and order and personal safety that they may not have voted for Trump before, but he's got a proven track record. I mean, that man, when he was elected, kept every promise I'm aware of. There may be some I don't know about, but he kept every promise he made when he was president. I mean, that's a pretty good track record to run on. So everything you've said on this program up to this point can really be transferred and over to a campaign slogan: law and order, morality, treat people the way you want to be treated. And the opposite to that is live the life the way you want to live it. But that means people can go in and steal your stuff. There's no consequences. They can break the laws because there's no enforcement of the laws. They're trying to defund the police. So give us a little bit of your thoughts on that. Being now in 2024, how do you see that being received?
Well, again, I think we're getting more receptive because things are getting so bad. Now, you mentioned before about emphasizing law and order. You talk about a campaign slogan focusing around law and order, morality, treating people the way you want to be treated. You just pretty much summed up the basic message of the Bible.
Exactly.
So we have to realize that Christianity is not a religion. It is a reality. And if you try to defy or deny reality, it usually doesn't work out too well.
Well, it's called insanity.
Yes. Except I don't think, we talk about things being kind of in crazy out there. I don't think they are. I think everything makes sense from a certain perspective. So even if you see this crazy guy walking down the street, pushing his shopping cart filled with trash, wearing 8 layers of clothing when it's 110 degrees out while he does his little dance and shouts at the devil, that all makes sense to him. And if we knew what was going on inside his head, we'd say, oh, that's why you're doing that. So the power of this is we can reverse engineer certain actions and say, what motivated you to do that? And as we reverse engineer the crazy, what seems to be craziness, how does this make sense? How does defunding the police make sense? It makes sense if you're trying to destabilize the society, to crush it into small, manageable pieces so you can come in and sweep them up and put them in your pocket and use it for your purposes. And that's what we have to do. We have to realize, look at what's going on here. Even after all of this what again seems to be insanity, but really is very rational from a certain perspective. Look at what's happening. Even Joe Biden is starting to get a little tougher on the border. Even Newsom is, what happened when the Chinese leaders came over to San Francisco? They cleaned up the streets.
Exactly.
They didn't do it for us, but they did it for them. So they're starting to show that, well, their model is, see, the government can do this for you. If things are getting so bad, we want you to entrust the government. Well, we have to realize that it's not the government. It's the power elite that controls the government. To the power elite, the government is simply a tool that it uses to accomplish its ends. It's like a screwdriver, a hammer, a wrench. This is how it gets things done. It works through government. And the thing is, they're just kind of hidden. but they've always existed. Power elites have always existed, and they exist everywhere. This isn't something spooky and kooky. You know, I talked to a group here not too long ago. And they asked me to talk about this very subject. And I said, you know, if I try to reverse engineer what's happened in the country and try to make sense of it, how does all of this craziness, this nutsness make sense? And I keep coming back to the same answer. And I'm reluctant to say it because people say, oh, you're some kind of a wacko. But it all boils down to this. There is a power elite that is involved in a conspiracy to destroy America. Now
that's an important point. I mean, that is something literally true. It is provable. We can demonstrate it. So that point right there is critical.
And you look at the three elements, a power elite. I mean, they all sound kind of spooky and kooky to some people. And I mentioned these people. Some of you are nodding, saying, okay, this guy's got it figured out. Others of you are thinking that I probably have a tinfoil hat in the trunk of my car someplace. Let's look at those three elements real quickly. Is there a power elite? Of course. There's always been a power elite. There always is a power elite. I told them if I circulated paper and pencils and asked you to write down the three most influential people in this group, you'd all be able to do it, and you'd probably have the same names. So a power elite is just how things get done. Next, the conspiracy. Oh, people are being led to believe that conspiracy is stuff that just these wackos talk about. Yeah, well, it's the conspirators and their agents who say that stuff. They're trying to get away with it. Conspiracies are everywhere. Conspiracy is simply when two or more people get together and plan to do something more or less in secret. So plotting for grandma's surprise 80th birthday party is a conspiracy. What happens in a football huddle is a conspiracy. They're everywhere, and they're especially prominent and prevalent in politics, because politics is all about power, how you acquire it, how you distribute it, and how you
keep it.
And yes, and keeping it. But if you plan to keep power, you have all these groups out there who want that power. If you plan out loud how your group is going to keep power, it's not going to work. It's just like the quarterback doesn't go into the football huddle with a bullhorn and say out loud, you know, to the other team, you're going to run the halfback off right tackle. Well, guess what? Play's not going to work. So, of course, there's a conspiracy. The questionable thing is, why would they want to destroy America? Well, they don't want to destroy America as a whole, but they do want to, as we mentioned earlier in the program, they do want to destroy enough of those institutions, practices, policies, and beliefs that make us exceptional and give people the ability to live their lives in freedom, because that's what keeps them from taking the power.
Exactly. And then one of the main hurdles for them, they have to annul or dramatically alter or destroy the Constitution. The Constitution prevents them from achieving the goals that they're trying to reach. And so they have no way around that. They have to ignore it. And they're passing illegal laws every day in California. I mean, it is disgusting. Some of the laws that Newsom has instigated and has passed in California, where you can take an 8-year-old child away from their parents because they don't agree with their view of their gender, put them in a home that's run by people who do want them to have this gender alteration. I mean, that is, again, reality. That is insanity. So here we are. We're down to just a couple of minutes in the program. This has gone by so fast, and I kind of knew it would go by quickly. We need another program. We need to keep going with this conversation, because I think we're trying to touch on what the problem is so we can identify it rationally and sanely and clearly. You know, government is there to do us good if we follow biblical morality and truth. And so being a advocate for God and for living morally is a way to do that. That's kind of what we've been saying. And so
Exactly.
here we are in this situation in America that is pretty bad. But what we're trying to do, Lawrence, a few of us were getting together and we're trying to organize a recommitment to the Constitution, recommit our covenant to the Constitution, and make that something of a solemn gathering, and to voice our recommitment to that covenant to embrace and keep the Constitution of the United States faithfully, and trying to encourage other people to do the same thing. But really appreciate you coming on the show. You have so much insight, and God has given you so much talent and knowledge to know how to understand some of these things. I want more people to hear you, so we'll talk about when we can do another show. Thanks for coming on Wild About Liberty, and thank you for tuning in and listening. God bless.
They can't take that away.
Thank you for listening to Wild About Liberty with Terry Wild, only on KXEX 1550.